Yo, this right here is dedicated to the dedicated snow fighters. We see you.
Welcome everybody to Net Gain, whether you're checking this out live, checking it later. This is networking, encouragement, and training. I'm your host, Evan Tashwire from Jack of All People Trades. Got a guest with me today. So John, if you want to introduce yourself to the world here, let them know who you are, what your background is.
I'm John Mocharko, specialize in snow removal operations. I've been doing snow removal for 30 plus years and really enjoy growing teams and having everyone succeed and get the best out of all the employees.
Absolutely. So, and just for context, for those of y'all who don't know us, John and I have worked together, him in the operation seat, myself in the recruiter dispatch seat. So, we definitely have experience in some war stories. So what Net Gain is going to be today is it's going to be a combination of networking, encouragement, training. So we're going to start off with, I'll drop a quick encouragement, and then John and I are going to have a conversation talking about accountability in snow operations. So it'll kind of be podcasty. You'll get to hear it. Obviously, this will go up on our YouTube, so you'll get to see it back later. And then we'll break out for some networking time. So for those of you seeing this later, definitely join these live, sign up for our Net Gain email list to learn when we have sessions. And when you see those Zoom links come through, make sure you register, make sure you show up live, because this is a time for you to not only hear from experts in the industry and specialists, but also to network with other people within the snow industry. So we know nothing can capture the magic of a SIMA or Snow Alliance or Storm Days in person, but this definitely can be a good supplement to that. So before John and I start our conversation, the encouragement I want to hit you with is going to be what I call look back. And what I mean by look back is look back 5, 10, even 15 plus years and think about how far you've come. And why I say that's encouraging is because sometimes in our day-to-day, we face challenges. I'm sure everybody hearing this is thinking about challenges they are facing, things they have to do today, things that are on their plate, maybe even thinking, I don't know how I'm going to figure this out. But if you look back 5 years, I'll take myself, for example, in snow. 10 years ago, I didn't know the snow industry existed, let alone how to recruit in it, let alone how to consult in it. So if you would have even told me 10 years ago, I'd even be doing something like Net Gain, this would have been crazy to me, but I learned it over time. So every one of you has a 5, 10 year look back where you can look back over time and say, I didn't know how to do that, but now I do. So John, I guess with yours, do you have any kind of things looking back you've seen yourself grow over time?
Yeah, I never thought I'd be doing snow removal on a full-time basis and leading some really large crews into battle. It's kind of like you said, you start out small and you're doing onesies and twosies and kind of thinking, where's this going to take me? And all of a sudden it's like you're in charge of a massive operation and, you're building teams and gaining knowledge. And that's the thing. It's you're constantly learning and constantly expanding your knowledge base. And, that's interaction with friends and peers within the industry.
Yeah, 100%. So just like you said, kind of learning slow. And, when you're doing those little ones and twos, even at that point, when you were first starting plowing and operating, it's like, okay, I don't even totally know what I'm doing here, let alone thinking about leading a crew. So the encouragement is definitely, keep doing and learning along the way. I think of the one meme that I like of, it's like two stick figures. One of them's playing a piano and the other one's like, yeah, you need to stop. You're not any good. And he's the one playing's like, but if I stop, how am I going to get to be any good?
That's for sure. Constant improvement.
Yeah. So definitely, topic I wanted to talk about with us today is accountability in snow operations. So I guess from your side, when I throw the term out there, accountability in snow operations, what should that mean to a leader? So if you're talking to other snow operations leaders, what should accountability look like?
I think there's some key points. I think to start off with is like you have to have clear levels of service. So that's going to be your starting point, and then followed up with the documentation that pertains to those levels of service. And then there's the performance tracking aspect of it. And then you have the communication piece, which gets back to the customer and or the municipality or whoever you're doing this for. And then as part of the whole process, as you're thinking about this, you have liability management, which is the precursor to, how are we protecting the customers, the clients, and ourselves from legal claims? And, we're doing everything we can to mitigate risk.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would say those are your key points. And then I think we can dig deeper into all of those little points. And I think that's where that's kind of like the basis for which I think accountability in snow operations pertains, because it hits at every level, from an individual to the organization itself.
Gotcha. So basically, you say to the leadership, it really starts with, like you said, your levels of service, along with that liability management, performance tracking, seeing what's happening, and then also communication both to the crew and the customer. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. So so I would say from an accountability side, because I want to kind of follow the trail where you're going. A lot of what you talked about, things like levels of service, liability, even communication has to happen now. So what would you say kind of has to happen in an off season to set up good accountability? Like, what should leaders be doing now?
In the off season now, you're setting your levels of service. So like that's critical to make sure that, like, if you have a sales guy that's out there selling new services to a new client who you've never dealt with, there has to be an understanding to make sure that everybody's on the same page, so that your staff that's selling understands what it is you're delivering. And then obviously getting the client's expectations and what their expectations are. That has to be communicated back to the operations side, because what we consider a zero tolerance site might be different than what someone else considers zero tolerance. And then you obviously have, a lot of contracts have 2-inch triggers that says like, hey, we're not going to plow or do anything much until we hit the 2-inch mark. And then after that, we'll deal with it. Well, is that really what the client's looking for? Is that what, is that what people are? So again, it's gathering that information and making sure that both sides come together with an agreement. And then once you do have that, you need to set clear and precise details around that to build that level, because that information there is going to be used then to train your employees, so that when they're actually out there, doing the work, they can document what they did and get all of those things set, standard wise, and understand it. And then we can, use that document to check our performance against. Communication comes into that, is like, you need to communicate with the client, when does the service start? When does it end? What are your hours of operation? Mm-hmm. There's 1,000 things around communication, and it's like, storms are coming through, it's weather. So it's always a best guess. The weatherman may predict 2 inches, and 36 inches later, you're still plowing snow, going, okay, well, who got it wrong? So those are the kinds of things that, that's where the communication piece comes in. And then, obviously, with all of this is, when you talk about the level of service, everything's to mitigate risk from a liability standpoint. So that's obviously the driving factor in a lot of these decisions that people make, as to what level of service they want and things that they do. And that has to be communicated up front, and everybody has to be on the same page, from the owner of the company down to the salespeople, your operations people. Everybody needs to understand what it is that we're doing, and because we're driving towards one goal. Mm-hmm. And all of that needs to be communicated clearly and precisely.
Gotcha. No, so basically, right now, you said, again, came back to your first point originally about setting those levels of service, and, along with that, really communicating what those levels of service are. So, takeaway, I'd say definitely for ops leaders, and you can add anything to this you want, is right now, while we're in summer, if you're watching this, in summer, is to be setting those levels of service now and getting everybody on the same page with what they mean, so that the client understands start and end time. The client understands, when the crew's going out. Sales and ops understands what the client expectations are and are able to meet those. And everything's kind of on that same page right now and is really risk focused. So that is definitely a takeaway number one.
Yeah, and I think, tied to that too, it gets down to even like an HR perspective. If you're selling a client, for example, a zero tolerance site that operates, let's use a hospital, for example, well, that's a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week operation. That comes into, it's not only just the level of services, but, obviously with the level of service, we're going to know that, okay, well, it needs constantly, there has to be staff there the entire time during an event, which means now that your HR people know this, that has to be communicated to HR, so that they understand what folks are going to be needed along the way. So all of this stuff's coming in. Do we have the right equipment? Do we have the right de-icers? Do we have, all of this comes in because, there could be environmental concerns. There could be, are we going to use liquids? Are we going to use rock salt? Are we going to use treated rock salt? Are we going to, how's our sidewalks going to be handled differently than road surfaces or parking lots? There's 1,000 things that play into this. And again, it's a never ending thing. Like, just because the snow season ended doesn't mean the snow season ended. It just starts the next cycle. And you have to keep everyone informed and going, because as stuff comes on and goes off, it's all about staffing and where you're going to put people and how that's going to work. So this is it's the constant game of making sure that you have the resources in place, whether it's human resources or equipment resources, and getting everybody tied together and on the same page and constantly moving in the right direction.
100%. Yeah. So along with those levels of service, with having everything in place, I'd say takeaway number 2 here from a teaching perspective is have checklists for those important areas, so things like supply ordering. What do you need to order? When does it need to be delivered by? And with checklists, also have people who are accountable. So, it's like, you can have a checklist sitting on your drive or, print it out wherever. But if you don't have somebody who actually says, I own that checklist or I own a piece of that and sign off on it when it's done, then it's just a piece of paper. But if you do have that accountability with that checklist to make sure you're getting things done by the time they need to be, whether it's like you said, the equipment ordering, the mechanic work, fixing equipment, winter readying the machines, supplies, de-icers, making brine if you're a brine shop, delivering equipment to sites, hiring, all those kind of things, weather apps, make sure you have those. So yeah, definitely good takeaway is, checklists and, have somebody own each piece.
Yeah. They have to have the owner. And then, with the ownership of that, but you can assist or help them build out that checklist and make sure that, again, the feedback always has to come back to the team. Someone has to ultimately be in charge. And usually it's the head of operations, who your operations guy isn't the sales guy, but he has a big dictation on it. If sales is selling stuff you can't support from an operations standpoint, what's the use of them selling it?
Yeah,
and it's and HR can't recruit people without knowing what contracts we have and what people we need. So again, it's like everybody's tied together, and it's not this isolated island. There has to be that constant communication back and forth between people, and like you said, with checklists and weekly check-ins and stuff like that, it holds people accountable. And by assigning those tasks and knowing who's responsible, it's easy to follow up and make sure that everything's getting done when it needs to get done and on time.
100%. And I like that part about things need to go back to the top too, because along with the checklist and accountability, if things are taking a longer amount of time, or if there is bottlenecks along the way, whether we're in, I think back to when we last worked together was the winter right after COVID, and equipment was really hard to come by, so with that, if you have pieces that are hard to come by, you're trying to get new pushers and it's delayed, or in this situation now in 2025, when we're recording this, we have kind of the up and down tariff game. It might be this time, it might be that time, you know what I mean? So prices could change. So if you're running into any of that, letting people at the top know so that there's not surprises, or at least softening the surprises.
Yeah, right.
So how would you say, from an operations leader perspective, John, how have you got buy-in from seasonal staff and also held them accountable when, if you think about it, a lot of staff that operate for you are seasonal, they have other jobs, they might not even be available all the time, but yet from your perspective as an ops leader and as a snow leader, you need them to give that full-time effort because you are in a emergency response, liability control business. So how have you kind of got that buy-in and held people accountable when you don't necessarily have the full-time job thing to hold over their heads?
Well, I think that's where you have to know your staff. So you have to know what their expectations are. And it's like, for example, we can use a hospital situation, or we can use, a retail, the two different sides of it. So in a 24/7 environment, where you're in a hospital situation and it's zero tolerance, you're going to have a site supervisor there, which means that person's responsible for that site from the start of the snowstorm to the end of the snowstorm. Then they're going to have the staff that's actually, cleaning the sidewalks, the operators in the plow trucks, or the operators in the heavy equipment that you're using, and those sorts of things. And every level comes breaking down. So like you have, there's guys on my staff that they don't want any more responsibility than hopping in the saw truck and running the saw, or they don't want any more responsibility than hopping into a piece of equipment and running that piece of equipment to scrape the lot clean, with a pusher box under or a plow or something. But then there's other guys who are interested in the snow industry and they want to grow. They might be on a sidewalk crew. The first year they reach out, they start on a sidewalk crew, then they reach out to you and say, hey, I want to, get into a truck or get into a piece of equipment. And, I think I have the ability to run, a site. Well, those are the folks that you have to identify, and you work with them, and those become your quote unquote crew leaders or site leaders, however you want to call them, or foremen. Mm-hmm. Again, it's understanding every individual's expectation. And the thing about it is it's that clear service level that we've set up front, and we've got documented procedures to do things and how I expect things to run. So you get them to buy into those, and you make them understand where they fit, how they plug into that. And once you get that buy-in at that level, it becomes a lot easier to maintain, because now it's like they see where they add the value. They understand that, it's not like, yes, it's hey, I'm just the sidewalk guy, but they understand where they fit and how critical they are to the overall operations success of the company. So they buy into that, and then a lot of that comes into culture. But again, it's getting that individual buy-in from the field guy that thinks he's the lowest guy on the totem pole, when in reality he's not. So you have to, and again, by setting the clear expectations, documenting it, and then you do performance tracking on top of that to make sure that the person understands, like give them the feedback that they're looking for. And, don't always point out flaws, but point out, successes. And you have to create a good work environment. And a lot of that comes into, as we like to say, people know what they're expected. If you set the correct expectations, people will succeed.
Yeah.
You can't set unreasonable ones. And you have to be able to listen. And that's one thing, like after the storm, you have to do your post-storm follow-ups, and you find out where you failed and where you succeeded, and take and listen to that. I mean, I think a lot of leaders lead from the top down instead of the bottom up. And I have a tendency, throughout my career, I've led from the bottom up. I want to talk to the guy that's the shoveling the sidewalk with a shovel that has, he's out in the elements. He's the one that, is doing the hardest amount of work. And it's like, if he fails, we fail. As a company, it doesn't matter if the parking lot's clean. If you can't get to the, you got to cross the parking lot, but you can't get it in the front door because you can't cross the sidewalk that's got a foot of snow on it. Well, guess what? You failed. So he's just as critical as the guy plowing the parking lot. And that's where, again, getting their feedback, getting their buy-in, showing them how they add value. That makes everybody, part of a team, and it grows that team, and really helps out with solidifying, the overall goal of delivering the level of service you're trying to achieve, which is, obviously first rate.
Definitely. I think the common theme, if you had one takeaway from this episode, that went through everything you said, is definitely setting those levels of service, because, those levels of service being sets that expectation. And, as far as getting buy-in from the seasonal staff, I'd say takeaway number 3, in addition to, we already talked about the levels of service and the checklist, is know your team. Get to know your seasonal team. Know who wants to advance with the organization, maybe who could be full-time, or could be somebody every season that wants to be a seasonal crew leader or a route leader or a sidewalk crew leader. And then who just wants to be that steady Eddie of, hey, I just want to show up, run my salt truck, run my route, do the sidewalks, and leave. And put everybody in those best positions to succeed. And along with that, have the feedback, the coaching, both coaching for improvement and recognition as well. So knowing your staff and providing that feedback is really going to be key, I think, is from really what you said.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I know that, I've been doing this a long time. I know that there's things that I've never thought of that, people come to me and they'll tell me, hey, boss, you told me to do this. And, I think if we would have done it this way, we would, we'd have been more successful. I'm all for it. It's like I said, you constantly learn, and you constantly have to interact and be willing to take criticism. You have to be willing to take it and give it. It's a team effort. At the end of the day, none of this gets done without everybody being involved and on the same goal. You can't do it by yourself.
100%. So I'm going to wrap our conversation for now, but, just want to say to everybody, this has, been John Mocharko and I talking about accountability in snow operations. So really 3 big takeaways is setting your levels of service, at the beginning of the season, having checklists for things that need to get done, having people accountable for them. And then with seasonal snow staff, how to get their buy-in, since you don't have the full-time job to hold over them, is really get to know them, understand what they're looking for, whether they want to maybe move to full-time or a crew lead position, or if they're just okay being the steady Eddie. Get to know them and really get that feedback from them throughout the season. So, John, this has been great. We're going to move off the kind of podcast teaching part here into the networking part of NetGain. But I just want to close the recording by saying anybody who's interested in being part of this series, this is going to be, both the encouragement training that we start with, and then we're going to open up the virtual networking. So if you're seeing this later, if you do attend live, register for the NetGain email list and sign up when those Zoom links come out. You'll get to be here live and network with others, including the presenters. So that's just another way to connect in the industry. So, John, any final words from you?
If somebody wants to reach out, obviously they can find us, on social media or on LinkedIn, or reach out to Evan. He can get you in touch with me. I mean, it's all about, it's community, and it's about, everybody teaching and building a better snow industry together. I mean, it's like we all have to work together. So the more we share, the more, the more successful we'll all be.
100%. It's us against the storm.
They call you unsung heroes. Well, this is your song.